Hey everyone, I'm Tatiana and I'm joined here with Kaitlyn, and today we're going to be doing a C2C. So for the first question, which resources did you grow up knowing a lot about, and which ones were you not as educated or aware of, and what would like to know more about?
Hey, so I actually grew up in Drumheller, Alberta. So I grew up in a fairly small town with huge agriculture base. So agriculture was something that I'd always been familiar with. I just assumed that every community was like this. And then when I graduated high school, I moved to a small community in Alberta again called Camrose. And in Camrose, there's a huge mining community as well as obviously oil and gas. So that really opened my eyes to the oil and gas industry, but also mining and how many small communities it keeps alive in Alberta. And that kind of sparked a passion in me for rural Alberta and resource awareness. So
That's awesome.
how about yourself?
So I grew up in Calgary, Alberta. Oil and gas was always something that was just always there and present in my upbringing. Like I had a couple like family members who were in engineering, oil and gas. So it was usually a pretty familiar subject or topic. But I don't, that was kind of the one that was mostly, I guess, educated or aware of. And then the older I've gotten, the more I've kind of gone into other resources like agriculture. I did my studies, environmental studies at Carleton. And so a big part of what I learned there was localized food systems. And I had a lot of cool field trips, like local like farms and markets, and just like seeing how those local food systems are really, really just important and crucial, and just agriculture in general, obviously. So for me, I think I've definitely gone more into ag the older I've gotten, but I'm really curious to learn more about others. If I want to learn more about forestry, about geothermal, about nuclear, I think I'm really interested by just all those new renewable ways to get energy and all that kind of stuff. So, yes.
Definitely. I think that over the last 2 years, hearing more about hydrogen and nuclear has really sparked the conversation about how long will it take and what are the pros and cons to it. And I know I talked a lot about that in my last job. So it's been interesting coming into SFC and hearing those conversations again, but echoed in more of a people, planet, prosperity basis versus what is economically the best decision.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. So for the next question, what are your biggest concerns about industry and resources in today's day and age?
I think I'm probably going to have a different view on this than a lot of people. But again, I mentioned how a lot of rural Alberta is very industry based. And so when I look at natural resources and I look at when oil prices are lower or when we're unable to build a pipeline, what I really see are communities that I love and communities that my friends have lived in and the effects of that. So I look at Hardisty would be a great example. It's a small community about an hour away from me, but it is a pipeline-based community. There's a pipe farm there. And as industry has been slowing down, so has the whole community. So they started with losing a hospital or a school, which turns into losing a hospital, which turns into no longer being able to get mortgages for your house, and that being a conversation with the Canada Mortgage Association. So I think sometimes what we don't realize is how much resources affect our communities. And if you look at, say, Forestburg, which is a mining community south of Camrose, it's the same story. As less people are needed to work it, the community slowly dies around it. And so when you're in a city, you don't necessarily see those things, but all of a sudden, when you're in a small community that used to have a school and a hospital because of industry, and now you have no school, no hospital, you have to drive an hour to get your kids to school, these communities are dying. And I think that's my biggest fear with the natural resource industry in Canada right now, is that we need to put a push on it to at least provide Canadian energy sources to Canadians.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. I think from what I know of you, your background is in environmental studies. So I feel like your response to that would be very different than mine.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of have I guess a two-way answer for this. The one answer I would have is I have concerns sometimes about the authenticity, or I guess genuineness of, I guess, just companies as a whole. I think that from working with Canada Action and Students for Canada, I've learned that there's so many Canadian companies and any resources that are so just dedicated to making the most environmentally high standards processes and technique and everything they possibly can. Like, so much of even carbon sequestration is funded from industries like oil and gas and other ones. And I had no idea about that. So I think there are a lot of them out there that are pushing with that in mind. But then I also wonder how many, let's say, don't have it, or how much would say it for the PR, or just for, just to say it. But then who knows if that's actually the goal, And I think that it's one thing to say, yes, like, we know that we're going to transition. We know that eventually, obviously, like, whether it's in 100 years or 1,000 years or however long, it will eventually run out. So when, like, how that transition works is going to be different depending on each person's perspectives and how long they want, I guess, those things to last for, in a way. So I guess I just always wonder, like, how do they actually see that transition happening? Do they actually see it transitioning, or do they want to just hold on to it until it's gone completely, and then whoever's alive at that point will have to deal with the aftermath, right? But I don't think, I would like to think that's not the majority of companies who think that way. My other concern, I would say, is that there's a lot of distance between people's actual realities and their idea of resources. I think that, obviously, going from an environmental perspective and going to school in Ottawa, where that was the whole thing, a lot of people would just love to have the ideal, like, that the ideal reality of just being completely carbon, like, neutral and just renewable and everything. And, like, ideally that'd be amazing to have that. But then you see them kind of being very, very, very strong in their opinions of how things should be or how things shouldn't be. And yet we're still using our laptops that are made from certain mining products. We're still, in our apartments with our air conditioning and heating. And I mean, obviously that grid changes from place to place, but I think just even like the little things, like your contacts case or your toothbrush, or bigger things, like, even if you don't drive to school and, like, you bike, that bike was still made of, like, that tire, where the tire come from, So I think that people want a certain ideal of something, but then they don't really think about how it actually gets there. Even like with wind turbines and solar panels, like, we need to actually use and mine the products to make those, and you can't just materialize that out of nothing, right? So I think that people have to get comfortable with the discomfort that things aren't perfect right now, but they are on a path towards becoming better. But we can't just flip the switch and expect things to materialize in our perfect way, right? So I think that's my other concern, is that people don't take the time to think about just their own situation and their own life in relation to resources, and how you can still be an environmentalist and recognize that we're living in a world where this has been our backbone, and that's something we can still work from or work towards, But yeah.
For sure. I actually really like that aspect of it. It's something that's drew me to SFC, was having balanced conversations and non-polarizing conversations. But another aspect of that would be, I have friends who grew up in families that were very anti-resource, and I understand their viewpoints on it, but a lot of the times I wrap back around to resources before now. So when I say served in university, resources may not have directly paid my bills, but they did in some expense. Like, having an economy that's flourishing means jobs, and having jobs means infrastructure, and infrastructure means that more people have jobs. And so I do think that that's where a conversation needs to come from, is how are we being sustainable, environmentally friendly, and also growing and helping our communities. And I think that, again, I come from a very community standpoint on this. I would love to see, Camrose itself, agriculture with canola prices soaring, you see that in individuals, you see that in people going out for dinner. And I find that really interesting. It's just a direct correlation between all of the city flourishes when agriculture is doing well, or when oil and gas is doing well. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's just my last question. how do you think we can better bridge the gap between differing worldviews to have those better conversations that are less polarizing?
I'm actually really excited about this question. I think that one of the things that's important to me is that I don't go into a conversation expecting a winner or a loser. And I think too many times people have this idea that they're right. And if they're right, then I have to be wrong. And so in my personal life for the last 2 years, I've been really trying to foster conversations that have no right or wrong or no black and white. And next to politics, resources are the most polarizing conversation we can have. It seems like it's either you're for or you're against, but it's moving into that middle ground. And I don't have to be, I don't need to want a drilling site in my backyard to support oil and gas. And I also don't need to be against the environment to support resource development. So coming to that middle ground and really focusing conversations around like, what is our middle ground? There's things that I agree on with people. And I don't think that shoving my opinions down anybody's throat will ever better or further a conversation. That's why I love these C2C videos, is it's a time to have a discussion about resources. But it's also time to have a real discussion about where we sit on that spectrum and finding spaces where it doesn't have to be all or nothing is really important. And I think that that'll be important in the future as well as we go on, like through finishing university and going into careers. The people that work with SFC are the people who listen to Food for Thought or career development speakers. These are the people who are going to be writing policy in 10 years. These are going to be the lawyers. These are the environmentalists. These are the CEOs. And so having real discussions and trying to find healthy middle grounds is going to be so important in building a future that we can all be proud of. So I think this is why I was passionate about SFC in the first place. I guess I had one last question for you, actually. And that was, what do you think is the biggest challenge that we face in the industry right now, or in natural resources right now?
That's a good question. Okay, before I answer that, I just want to say, first of all, that I love that answer. And I think that consciously trying to have more conversations that are less black and white and more, there's no right or wrong, it's just in the middle. I really love that. I think that everyone should practice doing that, because I think so much of that polarization comes from that divide and thinking that you can't actually have a conversation just to have a conversation. So I think, yeah, I really am glad that you said that. I think it's something that we should definitely take note of, that just consciously making those efforts to check ourselves and just to make sure that we're being honest with not being just so biased that everything is either for or against us. So I totally agree with that. And to your other question, the biggest concern with industry right now, I would say honestly, it's the divide. I just think that it's so hard to make movements and to just start movements when people just can't agree at all. And I think disagreement is something that is just natural in humans. Like, it's not something we can avoid. But I do think that over the years, obviously, the pendulum swings and things get more and more polarized to the point where you can't even have a conversation, and then you can't even make a decision. And because, at some point, like, almost half the population is unhappy, or the other way around, right? And I think that right now, more than ever, as Canadians and as just anyone on the planet, being able to be just, I guess, thinking more about teamwork and collaboration in order to push us forward to a better future and push us forward to the great things that we all want to see in our own lives and future generations' lives. And I think that when there's such a divide for things as fundamental as a resource or as an energy source or as anything like that, like, it's just really, really, it becomes a lot more problematic than if those differences were still there, but people are still willing to find a middle ground in order to move forward. Right now, it feels like half the population wants to go one direction, half wants to go the other. So you're pulling this tug of rope and you can't go anywhere because both people so badly want it to go a certain direction. And I think there's extremes to all sides, and not everyone is as stubborn as that. I think a lot of people, more so than one would think, are in that middle kind of gray area ground. And so I think that's kind of the biggest the biggest concern for me, not just with industry, but just in general, is just how, as a people, we seem to have such a hard time right now coming together with, I guess, a balance. And I guess it's coming from a place that's heart centered, coming from a place of wanting to learn and to grow, and not to just, I guess, isolate ourselves from everyone else that doesn't agree, you know? And I think that maybe accepting differences, accepting people's different worldviews and their backgrounds, how they grew up, where they grew up, and recognizing those as valid, equally valid as your own experience. I think that's something that kind of can push us forward in that way. But if we can't do that, then we can't have any conversations, and we can't make any decisions that work for as much people as possible. Yeah.
And instead of learning from everybody else's experiences, we're stagnating and just having stuck in the mud. And the longer we do that, the less effective change becomes, because we won't be able to make it.
Exactly.
And we won't be able to create policy or really lay down the foundation for the generations that are going to come next after us if we're always fighting on the intrinsic little aspects instead of seeing the bigger picture. So,
yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. That was a great conversation. I'm Tatiana, and I'm with SFC.
And I'm Kaitlyn, and I'm with SFC.